Everywhere we see concepts made into ideals, tiny snapshots of how one ought to live. And from what source do people derive such oughts? Typically from a selection of cherry-picked scenarios, wherein certain values have, in particular contexts, produced pleasant or satisfying results. When one zooms out a little, one sees all of those contradictory situations where the ideals fail, or where they produce outcomes totally opposed to the original intention. And yet, the habitual deference to these values is now far too powerful. One cannot part with them. Distillation and simplification is, to all of us, the prerequisite for action. Rules and first principles help navigate us through this extremely complex experience we call life. However, each constraint we self-impose comes at a cost. It conditions the mind to constrict. It teaches caution, but more often than not, over-caution. By this token, we trust ourselves less, and thereby trust others less, especially when they don't fall neatly into our schema. The dogmatic mind regards everything outside its categorizations and surveillance as an existential threat, and, in all fairness, it is often right. The danger is that whatever is stagnant becomes a nesting place for parasites in the mind, and all reasoning sourced from this stagnation is likely to cause disease. Indeed, one may quench one's thirst from such a source in the immediate, but thereby suffer illness in the long stretches of life. Here is my thesis. When metaphysics dominate reasoning, when rationality uses its power to dress its yes and no with all the decorum of nobility and grandeur, when one invites everyone, everywhere, to drink from that bed of parasites as a matter of an objective good, a framework goes beyond its right. As such, this essay will be a polemic against lazy or presumptuous attempts at metaphysics, the types that justify actions retroactively without properly considering the downstream effects. For a morality or ideal cannot stand alone in the void, it must prove itself. Reality can be divided at infinite resolutions and measured across infinite axes: temporal, spatial, particulate, energetic. The possibilities are endless. We regard all that we discover to be useful, gravity, space, and so on, as stable, objective principles, independent of perspective, and when we find a way to isolate them as consistent, recurring forces, which can be interacted with in predictable ways, we think, all the better. Here, we designate a law. For example, we observe continually that effects follow a cause, rather than the other way around, and extrapolate from this the existence of time, flowing in a specific direction, forward. We even perceive it to be in front of us, as an impression. This reveals how easily spatial assumptions become conflated with temporality in the human mind, and should therefore be cause for stronger reflection. A warning against relying on intuition in matters beyond our senses. With new scientific knowledge, we have suggested that time is an existing dimension, not just an a priori faculty of perception. Here we consider it reasonable to employ truth and falsity claims in the language of ontological facticity, and this too is an overreach. To understand why, it is necessary to have a cursory familiarity with Spinoza's argumentation that all that exists is essentially a single substance being expressed in various qualitative effects, modulations, and degrees. Essentially, the whole universe can only be one substance, and everything we see is that substance expressing itself in various qualities. The line of argumentation is extensive, and I recommend further reading to properly understand the claim. The important thing for our purposes is that Spinoza's theory immediately negates any possibility that gravity, space, or any other concept be a substance in itself, unless it were literally the only substance and synonymous with God or nature. Why? Because each of these aforementioned concepts is articulated by psychological frames, making them fundamentally synthetic, and therefore diluted by subjectivity. By binding up time, for example, in its own category, even to designate it as a thing out there, it becomes definitionally mediated by human understanding, Not because science isn't genuinely making empirical claims based on rigorous frameworks. Not because we are mistaken when observing them as phenomena expressing activity and power. Rather, because in designating anything a concept, it is cleaved away from the totality and made an artificially delineated fraction, not to mention a representation. Since there is no way to decide which combination of axes and resolutions is most important for determining normatively how one should conduct this cleaving process, no perfect ontological vantage point from which to make a judgment, the resulting concept must be considered interested and contingent. Consider our designation of two lions as sufficiently similar to group them under a single word concept, quote-unquote lions, is only justified based on our personal relationship with them as phenomena. It is our desire to remain unmaimed, and the lion's desire to be satiated, which are necessarily incompatible. If we instead regarded the most important measure of things to be the distribution of electric charge, the scene of a person being ravaged by a lion would be merely a clash between electrical charges. In fact, the very idea of two lions and a person in this conflict would collapse, replaced by several clusters of charge colliding together. It is here that we see that, down to the most fundamental axioms of mathematics, 1 plus 1 equals 2, to denote that 1 lion plus 1 lion equals 2 lions, the correspondence of numbers to reality is a motivated human judgment. Yes, we can abstract once we have the idea of a number, but in application there must always be a human judgment. What counts as 1? 1 animal, 1 centimeter, 1 second? Even expanding out to mathematical systems like Euclidean geometry, we aren't looking at a necessary set of axioms demanded by the world. Multiple mathematic frameworks can be used for engineering, or describe apparent laws. When we conceptualize a perfect circle and from that discover pi, it can be tempting to say that pi was waiting for us to discover it. Yet, the perfect circle was itself a production of the human mind, and is not found anywhere in nature, as is well known. Pi cannot exist without first producing the ideal of a perfect circle, unless we would also like to say that every conceivable mathematical principle, across all mathematical systems, is also waiting for us. Almost certainly, we would never find a truly infinite sequence of pi in any empirical object. In the case of the closest approximation of a circle produced in reality, even produced by machinery, imperfections would inevitably arise at the microscopic level, not to mention we would be constraining the measurement in a certain time frame, implicitly. So, in summary of this section, a totality exists and we divide or predict it. This is no argument against the power of such theory for engineering, say, but it does undermine its status as a metaphysical force for truth or normative judgments. The eloquence of a system does not put it above us, it does not make it divine. Over time, ideas become bound up in language, and forget the perspectival status just discussed. Let us take the famous thought experiment, which employs the example of the ship of Theseus. For an example, the ship of Theseus sets sail, and on its travels is forced to replace every single piece which originally comprised it. The question is this the same ship that set off, or a different one? If we take the language used in this sentence, it would be very easy to claim that yes, the ship is the same. Simply invoking the word it and the indicate a continuity of existence. The issue with this conclusion is that language is doing all of the work here, and language itself does not produce reality as such. If we recall the previous section, the ship never could exist independently from totality in any essential sense, and was only ever conceivable with the power of psychology to bind it up in a concept, constrained on multiple axes. Thus, the logical progression is contingent on perspective, even if it genuinely describes a part of existence that we can observe with our sense mechanisms. The starting propositions determine what is later concluded, and so we can say that what we take to be true is often what is most congenial with our thought patterns. As an aside, it is noteworthy that the claim that the ship is the same becomes an even more intuitive claim when applied to humans. Despite now knowing that each of us has all of our cells replaced over the course of time, we still regard a person as the same person, possessing the same memories and lineage, though both a person and a ship can move through like processes of total material reformation. One we take more or less for granted, the other becomes a thought experiment. This enforces the idea that perspective is being smuggled in without proper scrutiny. To scale up this critique, let us look at the doctrine of universal love, which suggests that the way that humans will flourish is by the act of everyone loving everyone else. Implicit in its premise is the idea that love is a quantitative phenomenon, and that merely through an abundance of love, a natural purity or cleanliness is obtained. This does not follow from the standard causal relations we see empirically. To anticipate any moral debate around this section, I am not here arguing that there is no world where a principle of acting lovingly does not work in practice. I myself would be very pleased if this were the unambiguous solution for optimizing our flourishing, which itself is a complicated matter, and that all that was needed was to convince everyone by rhetoric and mimesis to follow this path. This critique is not, therefore, a rejection of love as a productive and positive mechanism, but an interrogation of the kind of metaphysical principles and myths which are often cited to justify pursuing it. That way we might evaluate reality as it is, not as we wish for it to be. The love we describe as a sensation is evidently an emergent phenomenon. Emergence is when countless individual components combine to produce a thing that is qualitatively different to any given one of its components. As a useful analogy, think of how a chessbot makes myriad calculations, which emerge in context as an incredibly strong chess player. None of the individual mathematical calculations can be defined as a strong chess player in itself, because it is too simple in the relevant context. Love as sensation is even more complicated. It occurs when, provoked by adequate stimuli, a great many chemical reactions and positively charged neurons fire, while others remain negatively charged as yet another contrast, to produce a phenomenon of utterly unique quality than its composites. Therefore, to regard a divinity or the universe as made entirely of love is a categorically different use of the word than when we describe the infinitive verb to love. The dark truth is that for love to exist at the resolution of human interaction, it begets a chaotic cluster of biological processes that we do not even like to consider too often, for fear that love might become too scientific, too mundane, too vulgar. Even if we were to assume that love is a latent force or energy being activated, we cannot deny what a messy process must occur to catalyze it. If we should wish for our bodies to be constituted exclusively by a material called love, we ourselves would be rendered into a mere tabula rasa, a cluster of love substance without a consciousness to experience it. And what is the implication of this truth at scale? Essentially that we cannot expect the emergent property of love to resonate in the spirit of the universe, not unless all of the constituent elements, meaning we ourselves, are varied, messy, destructive, and bound up in a deterministic framework, intelligible only at the resolution that we do not even have means to experience or evaluate, a resolution that is, for our intents and purposes, meaningless. Love requires qualitative difference and discernment, else it becomes diluted, declawed, denatured, and can no longer even be called love. The pretension to universal love regards a comfortable and unwavering mood as preferable to the volatility of the passions. In this sense, it produces a leveling of humanity, not only from individual to individual, but within the individual, as a dulling of feeling, a robbing of the right to judge and to value. And when the ability to value crumbles, so too does the whole selection mechanism of human organization. Every ideal which both begins in a concept and ends as a concept, be that love, life, property, is meaningless without context. The only thing that will happen is that the competing desires of different subjects will battle it out to label their own project under those concepts, and accuse others of the opposite, a phenomenon constantly seen in partisan politics. As has been explored, Difference and contrast is what produces meaning for us, not noise. We should not expect the same concept to appear at every resolution. This is fundamental, and it is perhaps the most overlooked flaw in idealism. To distill a prescriptive claim from my own judgments and perspective, concepts should derive their significance from our vantage point. The plane of immanence is of paramount importance, and this does not mean we cannot look to religion to see what it has cultivated and ignited in us. It does not mean that our pre-rational, unconscious activities cannot tell us about it ourselves. It does not reject the possibility that more subtle background activities may be discovered to influence us. It only emphasizes to reject any metaphysics which amounts to propaganda, which forgets its genealogical origins and thinks it can use anthropic language to reason back to the non-anthropic. Such errors are mere atavisms of thought, which keep us bound up in the past. New horizons lay before us once we finally shake off this mode of thinking. New depths will be revealed when we finally produce our reasons here on Earth in new and creative ways. No doubt it will be a challenge, but this process is already in motion. To sit idly by, resting on our convictions, is only to kick the problem down the road, to leave it for our ancestors to solve.